This is our last cafe. This is called the Common Good Cafe. We've been doing this all autumn. It's mostly a place for political conversation. I met Jim basically when I came here about a year and a half ago, and had learned about him as one of the professors across the street that is also a believer. And so I wanted to talk with him. And I wanted to sit down and kind of pick his brain a little bit. And I found out some wonderful things about Jim, and those of you in his class already know this. He's curmudgeon-y. He will confront you. He sometimes is not pleasant. And he is absolutely brilliant. And really a pleasure. And every conversation I've had with him, I've walked away from it having learned something. The last conversation is 3 of us pastors brought him over to share this great idea that we had. And we were thinking about bringing that idea to the campus. And Jim, not kowtowing to the clergy one bit, basically said we were out to lunch and what we really need to deal with is the hedonistic lifestyle of all you students. And so with that as an introduction, Dr. Wellman, thank you for being here.
It's good to be here. I didn't know I was that curmudgeon-y. That's hysterical. You know, I wanted to say something about the Methodist Church. And this is a nice thing. You know, it's funny. I've been meeting Methodists about every 2 weeks and having these wonderful conversations, literally. And one of those conversations was with Jan Ships. Do you all know that name? She is a Methodist, and she is a scholar of Mormonism. And we were sitting at a meeting in Phoenix on sociology of religion, and we turned to each other and we said, that was the dumbest presentation we've ever gone to. And then she turned back to me and she said, let's go for a cup of coffee, young man. And I said, awesome. And here she was, like 83, and just full of vim and vigor. And she said, let's go. And so we sat down for 2 hours. She told me about the Methodist Church, about Mormonism. And I said to myself by the end of the time, I said, you know, maybe I'm really a Methodist. So anyway, there's my homage to Methodism. Anyway, I'm glad to be here. You know, I really, you know, the Rob Bell book really came to me in 2011. I was in the summer of 2011. I was doing a book on megachurches, and the editor, Lil Copan, called me from Abington, and she said, you know, you've been recommended by someone at the Christian Century to think about writing a book on Rob Bell. And this is what I said to her. I said, you know, he's the only evangelical pastor I would consider writing a book on. And at that moment, I had heard some things about Rob Bell. And what I said to her was that what I had heard is that he had really made something beautiful about Jesus. And that's really all I knew about him. She made me an offer, a nice advance, and I said, okay, I'll take it. And from that point on, for the next 12 months, I did the research and wrote the book. But what's unique about this book, and this really is different from all the other books that I've written, and that is it's really done in a more colloquial writing style. And so for the first time, people have emailed me and said, I can't put your book down. And as an academic, if somebody says that to you, you know, you're sort of in heaven. And so, you know, and one of the ways I did that, just so you kind of get a sense of how I wrote this book, is for each chapter, I send it to 10 or 12 different people, both students and colleagues. And I said, read the chapter, see what you think of it. Is it readable? You know, how would you criticize it? Be harsh, and they did. And so I got great feedback on the book, and really, I think, made the book better than what it could have been. So you might ask, why do this book? My most recent book is on evangelicals versus liberals. And that was about this region of the world. And I studied 24 evangelical churches versus 12 liberal churches. And I sort of compared the two and kind of wondered what made them conflict and how were they different from each other. And frankly, during that book, after finishing that book and talking about it for a couple of years, I got tired of that debate. There's really a way in which I was bored with the debate between liberals and conservatives. And who knows, maybe you are too. I think there's a lot of people that are kind of bored with that cultural conflict. And what I found, writing and really doing the research on Rob Bell is that there was a way in which he transcended the conflict. He transcended the typical problems that liberals have and the typical dilemmas that evangelicals get into. And yet he had kept, and this is really where I felt very strongly, he had kept the gospel together. He had kept the gospel together. In fact, the gospel came alive, all right? Not only, I think, for the people that listened to him, but, in fact, for me. One of the things that I did was that I, on the treadmill, I would listen to a Rob Bell sermon, and I would not stop until he was done. And sometimes that went for 60 minutes. Okay, so these sermons were not, your typical liberal sermon. How many minutes do you get, Rich? 45. 45. All right. Wow. Usually it's like 15, and then if it's not 15, the congregation is going like this and going, when's this going to end? But he went on usually for about 45 minutes. I listened to 100 sermons on the treadmill, and I transcribed most of those sermons. And I'll say this, there was not one clunker in the batch of 100. In fact, on one of the sermons that I was listening to, about halfway through, I said to myself, geez, I don't know where he's going with this sermon. And maybe he's not, some sermons just don't go well and they go nowhere. And but halfway through he said, I've been confusing you on purpose. And I thought, oh, dang it. And then he went on to make his point, and it was brilliant. And so there was a way in which I was really shocked by how good he was, especially in terms of preaching. The other thing that really got to me was how alive the Bible became for me in ways that I had not experienced, certainly in the preaching I've heard, and frankly in my own preaching. So that was something really, really vital and really exciting. So that, I just kind of wanted to lay that out. And then in the midst of that, I went to see him at his church in November. And well, let's back up just a sec. Rob Bell had become very famous in 2011, partly because Time magazine had made him one of the 100 most influential men in the world, okay? For an evangelical pastor, for any pastor to get that kind of recognition, quite exceptional. And the second thing he did is that he published Love Wins. And I don't know if how many of you have read that book? And that made him very controversial. Before Love Wins, I would say Rob Bell was probably the most popular evangelical pastor in the nation. Up and coming, young, vital, incredibly creative, and so incredible celebrity in the evangelical world. Love Wins became a bestseller, and it became very explosive in the evangelical community because he began to ask the question whether or not people were going to heaven or hell, and really question whether or not a good God would send anyone to hell. And so, in the evangelical world, that's sort of like dropping a bomb. And in fact, that's what happened. He lost 1,000 people from his congregation in Grand Rapids, a congregation that he had started in 1999. On the first day of that congregation, he had 1,000 people coming to the church. A year and a half later, in 2001, he had 10,000 people coming to the church on a regular basis. Okay? So this was an incredible explosion of people interested in what he had to say. So in the process of working that out, he became, a celebrity, but also sort of an enemy to many conservative evangelicals. He sort of lost his shine. And so in the midst of that, it's really kind of an incredible story. In the midst of that, he was at the 100 most influential people time, their celebration. He was there. Carlton Cuse, who maybe some of you know, he's a producer of Lost, the TV show. They met. They become instant friends. Bell says, I have an unpublished novel I want to send you, and I want to turn it into a TV series. And Cuse says, man, I don't really want to read it, but since you're a nice guy, I will. He sent it to Cuse. Cuse read it. He criticized it, said you have to change all these things. Bell got it back to him in a week. Cuse said it's ready to go to Hollywood. Okay? And he went to Hollywood, sat down with 6 Hollywood producers, played out this TV series to them. One of them was sitting on this ball, one of those squeezy balls. And Bell gave the final part of the presentation of the main character in Stronger. And Bell got finished, and the guy on the ball says, that was amazing. Anyway, they signed him up for the TV series. And so he basically said the criticism, the controversy, the loss of people in the congregation, and just the tension on him, really, the stress and the tension, he decided to leave the church. He decided to leave the church the moment I signed the contract to write the book on him. So it was the timing was quite strange, and so in the midst of that, I tried to get a hold of him. He's a public figure. There's not a private phone you could look up. So I had to go through a third party. I went through a third party. Took about 2 months. He finally called me. I was in a coffee shop. I answered my phone, and he says, hey, this is Rob Bell. I said, oh, man, that's awesome. Okay, and then so, we took up a conversation and kind of really, frankly, became fast friends over that. Had about 20 hours of interviews with him. Went to Grand Rapids, saw him preach. It was quite an experience, about 3,500 people in the 2 services that I witnessed. I saw charisma, right? I don't know if anyone has seen charisma before. But after his sermons, people would really come up to him. And, several young men in particular were literally shaking, okay, as they were approaching him in the line to greet him and to talk to him. Which was, frankly, kind of pathetic in a certain sort of way, but also confirming that this guy really had something going on. That's sort of the story of how this was constructed. What did I find? I hope you read the book. I think the book is a powerful sort of revealing of who this guy is. I think, and this is one of obviously the subtitle of the book, that he's kind of creating a new American Christianity. And this is, and let me try to break this down. I think what he's saying is this, is that the gospel is true, not in whether it has the right doctrine or the right dogma. The gospel only becomes true as it's incarnated in service, love, and charity towards those who are left behind and least last and lost. Okay? And so what he would say, what I think he would say is that incarnation is not a matter of building a church or church building or building a cathedral or making something beautiful out of buildings. But it's a matter of the church becoming the mission of Jesus Christ in the world. And let me tell you how he did it. In 2001, he was basically given a mall, okay, for $1. A broken down, ugly mall. I visited it. It's ugly. It has no signs on it. It has no fancy, there's no signs to the church. There's no advertising for the church. There's zero. It's blank. The outside of the mall is blank. It's in kind of a, not a great part of town. And so what they did was simply they cleared the mall out inside, set up chairs around a stage, put a band in there, painted the walls black and gray, and he stood up and preached. And the one fancy thing was four-sided screens for visual display, and for video and whatnot. And so it was very simple. One of the things that I respect most about him, he left the church in 2011, zero debt. Zero debt. Now, if you know anything about megachurch pastors, they almost always build a cathedral within 5 to 6 years. Big building. And he didn't do that. They gave away probably around $11 to $12 million during his tenure. They started ministries to Africa, building wells that created water in places that had not had fresh water before. They did an amazing job in AIDS prevention ministries. They did incredible things for the inner city in Grand Rapids. Bell moved into the inner city with his 3 young children for 2 years, sort of as an act of solidarity with the poor. He basically tried out what that would be like. He found it difficult and gave that up. In 2008, in the midst of the struggles and the big arguments around the Iraq War, he came out with a book called Jesus Wants to Save Christians with Don Golden. He basically said America is an empire just like Egypt, just like the Roman Empire. Very critical of the Iraq War. Lost another 1,000 people from his congregation. Came out in 2003 for women in ministry and leadership, which was unusual for his background in the evangelical conservative culture. In a sense, you could say he sort of went against many of the conventions of his own past, his own evangelical past. He had gone to Wheaton College. And he said this, and I don't know if you've seen this yet, but there's a New Yorker article that just came out called The Hellraiser, a megachurch's pastor's search for a more forgiving faith. And just came out in this November, November 26. And what he said, and I think he said the problem with the church is that it gets used to doing the same old thing. And the real task of the gospel and the church is to basically transcend itself and get over itself, and in a sense almost destroy itself. In the effort to do ministry in the name of Jesus Christ to those who are, left behind. Okay, so it eventually. So what he eventually turned into was a kind of evangelical liberation theology. All right, and which in a sense doesn't really make sense in our present day situation. It doesn't really make sense. And the other thing he did was he simply dismissed all labels. He said, I'm not an evangelical, I'm not a liberal, I simply seek after Jesus' kingdom. And that's it. And I try to present that and produce that in the most creative possible ways. So he really, he took enormous risks, right? He basically sullied his nest, right? He did the things that ruined his career as a megachurch pastor, right? And he would say to me, and I said, man, Rob, you've really left a lot behind. And I said, why'd you do that? Why'd you take so many risks? And he just looked at me and said, what do I have to lose? And I said, dude, you have a lot to lose. You have a huge following. You know how hard it is to get bestsellers and to get the kind of following you have? And he said, no. I've been preaching to my people that take risks and to take risks for the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's what we're doing. So he moved to California to pursue these Hollywood TV shows. And you might say, well, isn't he selling out? I really don't think so. Number one, the shows weren't piloted, and who knows what's going to happen. It's a risk, to think that your TV show is going to work on Hollywood is a huge risk, as I'm sure a lot of you know this. In any event, okay, so that's it. So, I think Rich probably wants me to wrap this. Let me read you the last 2 pages of the book, which I think are the two or three best pages of the book. So here they are. Here it is. This is the great challenge. Here's the challenge to each of you. This is really it. Nevertheless, Bell represents a shift in American Christianity and in American culture more broadly toward what Vadimo has called a non-religious form of Christianity. Whether Bell describes himself as a movement leader or not, his faith acts as a clarion call for this vision. To be sure, the movement is represented in people who are currently more outside the church than in its midst. But he continues to urge the role of the church as a catalyst for this vision. The gospel, this is good. This is good. Okay, listen up. A lot of people criticize him because he steps outside the church and that he didn't protect the gospel. He didn't defend the gospel. And what Bell did, and I think this is brilliant, and it really inspired me, is that he knew that wasn't his job. Right? It wasn't his job to protect anything, to defend anything. His job was to feel the freedom of Christ and to act in service to that freedom and to that mission of justice in the world. So he says, so I say, the gospel can't be protected. Neither can it be destroyed or confiscated. In Bell's vision, it is always and forever revealing itself in actions of charity, whether inside or outside the church. No one owns charity or the revelation of Jesus Christ. He maintains, however, that it can be distorted by dogma and obscured by those who seek to own it. He desires to witness to what he calls a beautiful Jesus, who comes to announce the kingdom of God. Where charity lives, forgiveness is practiced. The outsider is welcomed because the outsider is the one in whom Christ dwells eternally. The genius of Bell's message and the truth of this beautiful Jesus becomes real only when Jesus is enfleshed in acts of charity and compassion. While Christian belief is that Jesus was incarnated in flesh, this belief is all too often debated and argued to the point where tribes form, enemies are made. This should sound familiar. And the very basis of the revelation is defeated. This is precisely what Bell warns his followers against in his last Mars Hill sermon. He says this is, I think this is the best line of the book. Beware of those who take the flesh and want to turn it back into words. Bell comforts his church and challenges them to show in action, rather than defend in word, the love and truth of Jesus Christ. Here's the sermon. This is so damn good. This is his last sermon. I wish I could preach like this. This is his last words to his church. Okay, I write this to you because of how many of you have been challenged about your participation in the life of this church. Often with the accusation, but what do they believe over there at Mars Hill? As if belief, getting the words right, is the highest form of faith. Jesus came to give us life, a living, breathing, throbbing, pulsating, blow your hair back, tingle your spine, roll the windows down, and drive fast experience of God right here, right now. Word taking on flesh and blood. And so you found yourself defending and explaining and trying to find the words for your experience that is fundamentally about a reality that is beyond and more than words. Or when you find yourselves tied up in knots having long discussions about who believes what, a bit like dogs doing the sniff circle. When they meet on the sidewalk, do this. Do this. Do this. Take out a cup and some bread and put it in the middle of the table and say a prayer and examine yourselves. And then make sure everybody's rent is paid and there's food in their fridge and the clothes on their back. And then invite everybody to say yes to the resurrected Christ, who whatever yes they can muster. With whatever yes they can muster in the moment. And then you take the bread and you dip it in the cup in the ancient future hope and the trust that there is a new creation bursting forth right here, right now. And then together taste that new life and liberation and forgiveness. And as you look those people in the eye gathered around the table from all walks of life, and you see the new humanity, sinners saved by grace, beggars who have found bread, showing the other beggars where they found it. Remind yourselves that this is what you believe. Remember, the movement is word to flesh. Beware of those who will take the flesh and want to turn it back into words. Okay, pretty good, huh? Okay, so in the end, the only true test of faith begins and ends in an incarnation. Love made real through actions. All else is straw. Okay, that's my last words. So, I think, I suppose what I want to say really, I think there's a way in which my faith was confirmed by the book and by the research, and stimulated and really inspired. And also, there was a certain degree of freedom that I discovered through this that was really, very exciting for me. So anyway, I hope you enjoy the book. I think we're going to have a time where Rich is going to lead us a little bit. So go ahead, Rich.
When I grew up, or when I first became a Christian, I went to a very conservative church. It was an end times church. It was very moralistic. And by end times, basically the world was done and, all we can look forward to is Jesus coming back and rapturing us out of this. Now I'm a left-wing lunatic. I'm way on the left-wing side of it. And so my perspective of the evangelical culture and a mainline liberal United Methodist Church culture is evangelicals get stuck in a belief system, and your experience has to conform to your beliefs. And the beliefs are carefully guarded by the clergy. In a mainline church, most of which are dying, it is one's experience that trumps one's belief. When I read this book, Jim, I kept scratching my head saying, and it's like for example, love wins is about hell. I mean, that's an old argument in a liberal church, and we don't even care to talk about it anymore. What is the difference between where Rob Bell came from, the evangelical subculture, and where the ecumenical church is today? Outside of his tremendous capacity to communicate, but that just makes him a spectacle. But the actual message that he's given, can you share a little bit about what you see as the difference? And then we'll break up into groups.
Wow. Well, maybe it was my experience of his message that kind of inspired me. And hopefully I got that through in the book. I think it's hard to say. I guess you wanted me to be really honest here. Honestly, I experience a lot of liberal clergy as not convinced about that God exists even, or that the gospel is real or it has any real power. And I'm not talking about you. I think you believe it, and there actually feels like there's power in the message. And so that's what I believe that the gospel has world-changing power. And that power was communicated through Rob Bell. I think the liberal church has simply lost any sense of the power. So, that's kind of harsh. And so that's why I think it's dying. I think most people, there's no energy at these churches. Evangelicals, to generalize about evangelicals is kind of dangerous because there's so many subcultures within the evangelical church. It's just, so, at least in Bell's church, you felt like the gospel was really being incarnated, both in word and in deed, and there was a real connection between word and deed. And so it's not so much the belief system that was different, it's the power of the church. It was the power of the message. It was the power of an incarnated gospel that just went, whoa, man. Wow, you guys really believe this stuff. And people were changed, people were comforted, people were challenged, people were turned on, people started moving into ghettos to transform them. There's stories throughout this book that talk about that. People actually were being moved into works of charity and justice. And so, yeah. So, I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah, I think it's mostly the latter, I would say. And I think there's some unique giftedness here in terms of his creativity. I think there's some specialness in that sense. Yeah, but those are tough questions. Is the gospel unique? I think it becomes unique when it's lived out, and it becomes powerful, and so, I think it was, yeah. The question is, what is the gospel, or if when I use that term, what is it? Is it substitutionary atonement theory? I don't mean that, and neither does Rob Bell. So I think what he means by the gospel is that the kingdom of God that is preached and proclaimed by Jesus Christ, and that gospel in terms of the kingdom is an incarnation of God's flesh in the world in charity, justice, and love, and forgiveness, and love of neighbor and enemy. So that's what I mean by it, and that's where he has come. And I think it's one of the great unfortunate aspects of the last century that the Christian gospel has been turned into a ticket to heaven, and based on Jesus' blood. And I was preached, a young life leader preached that to me. And even then, it was in high school, even then, I had no idea what it meant. I really couldn't understand what he was talking about. And I still really don't. So I never went through my conservative evangelical period. A lot of people have, and I know that. So when I say the gospel, it doesn't mean what you mean, because I didn't have that experience. And my experience of the gospel was reading the Bonhoeffer's Cost of Discipleship when I was 16, 17. And I went to a Josh McDowell revival, and halfway through, I literally got up and left because I had no idea what he was talking about. And I went home and read Soren Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling. So for me, I just never went through that period of time. But I know a lot of people have, and it has unfortunately ruined Christianity for a lot of people. And I think Rich and I were kind of talking about that, in the sense for a lot of liberal Christians, the actual faith system of the gospel is simply so strange and so weird that how can you believe that stuff? And has no power for them. So, it's unfortunate. But thank you for your question. Exactly, and I think it took him some years to get out of that. And one of the ways that he got out of that was by going back to Near Eastern roots of the Jewish scriptures and the Hebrew scriptures, and really understanding the Jewish nature of who Jesus was, and the kind of this worldly notion of Jesus's ministry and his hope. And the kind of kingdom he was talking about. So I just don't think in those terms. That's really interesting that you're asking that question. I would never think that. It's really interesting. I mean, I think it's a really interesting question. I don't think we really know exactly. I think one aspect of it is that you could argue. And I like Rene Girard's argument that the New Testament reveals the nature of scapegoating, and that Jesus was, in a sense, the perfect scapegoat. So he doesn't act as a scapegoat; he reveals the scapegoat method. So he should not have died. But he was scapegoated, and the New Testament is one of the first books, in a sense, to reveal the problem of scapegoating that the human community always takes up in a crisis. In a crisis, always find the weakest link and then scapegoat them. So, anyway, yeah, very good. And he confronts the violence of the human community that always turns on its weakest link. And it also recovers the radical nature of the gospel. Or not just the gospel, but the New Testament. It reveals the pitiful nature of human community construction through scapegoating. And which we see over and over and over again. We see that today. We see that with in the Middle East over and over again. We see, and one of the things I think is happening in America is with the spread of civil rights to gay brothers and sisters and others, is actually, to me, the playing out of the gospel of freedom and true, really the radical egalitarian nature of the gospel and the kingdom of God. So. Does that make sense? So to me, man, when I say the gospel, it's totally radical and it's totally beautiful. And it totally reveals the pitiful nature of human violence. Yeah, totally. Yeah, good. Well, I think, you're saying we're stuck with the atonement, this substitutionary atonement. I'm not stuck with it. I'm not stuck with it. I don't think about it. And I'm going to refuse to. I think it's wrong. I think it's just furthers the not for me. I mean, it's not a reality for me. I think it's wrong. I think it's kind of anti-gospel. I think the gospel itself it frees us from all that. And the resurrection of Jesus Christ is the good news of the kingdom of God that spreads without scapegoating others. And that is so beautiful. That is just so beautiful. And so that's what I believe in. And I just can't go back there. I will not go back there. I will not. I am free. Yes. Yeah, no, there's 3 points. Well, the Christus Victus, I think, idea of the atonement, is very powerful, and that is in Christ we are free from death, we are free from scapegoating others, we are free from our sin, and I think that's very powerful, and I think, in essence, he would probably go in that direction. I think there's a way in which the liberal church, I hate to generalize about anybody, but oh well. What the heck? The liberal church kind of has lost that freedom and that victory and that power. That's kind of my experience of it. The second question was, Why isn't he a part of a church, in essence? And can the gospel or can the kingdom of God become real outside of a body of believers who come together and confess and break bread together? I think it's a really good question. You know, I'm just tired of judging others. I'm not in the position to judge him. I think he did something beautiful. I think he's taking a break. Give him a break. Good grief. He did more. Okay, let's put it this way. Let's just get real. I said, Rob, and he didn't brag. I said, Rob, how many people come up to you and say, you totally transformed my life? Yeah, okay. He said, Jim, and he didn't, I asked him the question. He said, Jim, it's probably thousands. I can't, you know, it's just unbelievable. And I said, oh, man. And I thought, wow, and I know that's true. And so I sort of wondered, and I frankly did say to him, geez, why don't you preach again, man? That's your best gig. I think that's the thing he does best, is preaching. And he just doesn't feel called to it right now, and that's okay. And so the transformation that he has wrought, he's done a lot of good work. He really has. I've seen it. I've heard people just be transformed by what he said and did for him. And that's a lot more than what I've done, so who am I to judge? But it's still a good question. I think it's worth question. It's worth asking. I'm a part of a church. I run my youth ministry, man. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah, Dan? I think that's a great question, Dan. Thanks. The question is God's presence necessarily involved in powerful preaching, in the power of good preaching? And I think it's a great question. Frankly, a lot of liberal theologians ask that question of me a lot and are really suspicious of powerful preaching. And obviously they're talking about kind of charismatic, enthusiastic preaching. I think this is just my problem. And that is, I like powerful preaching. If I had my druthers, I'd probably be in a black church with a great preacher. I just love hearing the gospel in a dramatic fashion told to me. And to me, yes, I feel the presence and the power of God. But everybody is different. So let's I think people feel it in different ways. And I think charismatic preachers are different. Some can be very quiet and very powerful, and I think charisma is really important in the sense that charismatic leaders usually have their finger on the pulse of the problems of the times and have, to some extent, solved that for themselves and now are sharing it with the group. And so in that sense, I think that's what Jesus did. I think he was a spiritual charismatic, a kind of virtuoso. So I make no negative criticisms of charismatics. I think they're amazing, gifted human beings. But I think you're exactly right. It can come in various forms. I tend to like the louder forms and the more performance-oriented forms. I just love that. Oh, my God. Okay, can I tell you a story? I was in Chicago, and so I study megachurches, and I got the chance to go to Barack Obama's old church, Trinity United Church of Christ. And I was there at 7:30 in the morning, Sunday morning. There's 1,000 people in the congregation, 7:30 in the morning, and they are rocking to gospel music. They are as liberal a church as you can come by. They're building a green 10-acre site for organic food and youth stadium or youth gym and an elderly place, and for $80 million. It's an 8,000 member church. He was preaching a liberation theology using very technical economic language, but doing it in an African American hip hop rap. It was awesome. And I wish I could do it myself. And so for me, that's what I love. So yeah, no, I mean, I felt the power of God. I guess what I like about that is that I think great institutions usually have some energy, whether it's through charisma of the pastor, charisma of the leader in some form or another. And so, you know, I was talking to my class today, some of my students are in this. You know, these are a form of interaction ritual chains. And we know in sociology, certain interaction ritual chains have more energy than others. That can be quiet energy, or that can be loud energy. And I just happen to like it loud. But it's just a total personal preference. So I would never say it's, you know, the loud stuff is where God is. It's just where God happens to be for me. Does that make sense? And I think, you know, you can certainly, charismatic leaders especially who are enthusiastic and loud, can fall in love with themselves. And that's a problem. And we know that's a problem. And actually in the book, I identify the kind of the dark side of charismatic leaders. And I think it's a critical issue. And it's actually an issue I'm looking at writing more on. And I think it's totally fascinating. I don't think anybody's writing on that. I really don't. Haven't come upon too much on it. But, you know, charismatic leaders are really important to movements, that's for sure. I think that's a great point. Again, I would say Paul, without a doubt, was a charismatic leader because he created the energy, whether through the letters or his person, that you know, changed the whole empire eventually. So I think it's a great, yeah. Totally, but I think it's one and the same thing. I think loud, soft can both be charismatic. So I don't really make judgments on how loud or soft it is. It's just whether it works to a large extent. Yeah, you know, let me break in. You guys having a good conversation. I think Paul had a huge ego. Let's not be. I think you just have to be real about that. He wanted to be an apostle, and he self-anointed himself. I mean, good grief, that was and Jesus, interestingly enough, you know, and now here I'm agreeing with you, Dan. I think was probably a pretty soft person, and probably, you know, quiet in some form. You don't. Whereas Paul was loud. Maybe he was a bad speaker, but he was loud when he did it. And when he wrote, it was loud. Well, Dan said that Paul became all things to all people, and I think that's exactly what a charismatic individual does. He hones in on the spirit of the time, and then feels it, empathizes with it, communicates the empathy, and then comes up with, you know, exemplifies the self-efficacy, and then creates a solution for those who are listening. That's not bad, folks. I mean, basically, probably most of you are Barack Obama supporters. I mean, Barack Obama is a classic charismatic figure. Now you know, I don't know if he's solved the problems. I mean, I think he's got some problems, but that's another story. But he's classic. That's a very classic, charismatic individual character. Another question? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, no, it's a great question. Hasn't Christianity sort of imploded on itself especially by discriminating against women and minorities? Yes and no. You know, you know, some of you know more about this than I do. You know, if you read Paul in Galatians, you know, there's neither female or male, neither Gentile or Jew, neither slave nor free. And that radical egalitarian force in human consciousness and human history, I think, is still being worked out. We're slow learners. And I think it's still, I still find the gospel as revolutionary as any message I hear about. I think, you know, and maybe I'm a slow learner myself. I think one of the beautiful things, one of the powerful things for me has been kind of the radical egalitarian spirit that he embodies and passes on. And that is, you know, perhaps we're living in a post church. We're living into perhaps a post church Christianity, and a post, you know, a post leaderful Christianity. I mean, maybe we're living into something really radical, you know, so that we don't need leaders anymore. So that, you know, we don't create leadership hierarchies anymore. And maybe that's why Bell left his church, because he didn't want to, you know, sort of be molded into the typical mega church pastor. Maybe he just said enough. And maybe he's waiting for one of us to step up. Or maybe all of us, or maybe we'll all just start small groups and call it church. And maybe that's beautiful, and maybe that's where we should go. I mean, I certainly don't think the organizations that we have started so far in Christianity have been all that great. And anyway, so I think that's kind of radical. That's unique. Awesome. Just kill the church. And, you know, the beauty of that, here we're on camera. The beauty of that, I love this. You're the Presbyterian minister. I love that. You know, the beauty of that is that I think Bell trusts God. The radical nature of the gospel is that Christ is being incarnated. And if we screw it up, it'll still get done. And it's so, you know, that's cool. That's good. That's revolutionary. That's good news. And hierarchy always, let's be honest, it always gets taken over by men like me and others. Yeah. Dan, you got one more? Oh, you know, you always have to have an iconoclast to ruffle feathers. And, you know, maybe I'm helping him, you know, by writing this book on him. And maybe I think it's all a good thing. So, you know, I used to feel depressed about where the church is, but maybe it's all going the right direction. So, yeah. Hi, okay, yeah. Oh, yeah. You know, I think the question about youth and Stephen Colbert, he's a lay Catholic, and as far as I can tell, a fairly strong social justice kind of Catholic. So yeah, no, I think he's, people have youth all wrong. If you love them, if you show real interest in them, they respond. They love that. And, you know, I take 30 on mission trips in the summer, man. It's awesome. The best thing I do is probably doing that. This last summer, we go to the Sioux Reservation to help paint houses and all that. And, you know, they organized about 300 kids, and they can all go down to the youth leaders. They're playing the loud music, and all the kids can come down and see their youth leaders. And so, you know, all 30 of my kids come down, and, you know, I get to bless each one. Oh, man. That is heaven. So, you know, incarnated love, you know, is just a beautiful thing, and that goes across generation. And kids need it, and they want it, and they want to share that. So it always works. The gospel's always good. It works. It works really well because people want love. That's a good way to end it.